Hey everyone, and welcome to our first episode of our Pokemon Blue playthrough. I wanted to start off this recording by touching a bit more on why I'm making this playthrough. And it's really because I wanted to replay through all of the old Pokemon games, both ones that I've played before and ones that I haven't. And while I was thinking about ways to do that and different ways to replay through the games, I thought to myself, why don't I just record it? And usually to me, that's by recording myself through an Excel spreadsheet or in my memories, but this time I decided that maybe I would do it through recording it. So I figured that, maybe I'll post it and maybe other people will want to see what I'm doing. So with that, let's get started. One of my first memories with Pokemon Blue was with my cousin owning the game. And as part of her owning the game, it was still, I think, a little too early for me to get into Pokemon. But I just remember replaying over and over and over again the starter selection, and especially with this layout, even more so than a Leaf Green or even Crystal, which came out when I was a little bit older. So, it's really a throwback to me a lot of times to be able to play these. I'm actually playing on a modified Nintendo Entertainment System NES controller. This is one that is an original shell of an NES controller that I have, but I modified it using an 8-bit dough modification kit. They're not a sponsor to the channel, but I think their products are great, especially the modification kits. They're very easy, plug and play. I have them for all the controllers I believe they've released. And so I figured that would add a little bit of texture to the playthrough. So with that, let's dive in. Oh, this is always such a great opening. It's so funny looking at what Oak looked like, and especially a lot of the other old Pokemon, what they looked like in the beginning before you had some of these more fleshed out models, especially in a red and blue or a red and green in Japan. And welcome to the world of Pokemon. My name is Oak. People call me the Pokemon Professor. See, this is one of the sprites that I'm talking about. This looks like a Nidorino, and you get the feel for it, but its mouth is a little bit bigger. It looks like its body is a little bit more condensed than what it would grow to be when, especially in the anime and now how things are today. And I do love the original cries too. They're fantastic, especially how Game Freak has worked to continue to keep those cries in games. I study Pokemon as a profession. I can't say that that's my profession right now, but there are certainly many people who have made a lot of professions and a lot of money off of this. So first, what's your name? When I was a kid, I always named myself after my own name. And when thinking about how to do this playthrough, I thought that would only be fitting to start off. I'm hoping that we could maybe do a bit more of a more interesting playthrough going forward for some other games. But I thought, for this one, why not just do an old-fashioned nostalgic run? One of the things I always thought was so funny was my name, Gregory, just fits in the 7 letters that they give you, or the 7 spaces they give you for letters in your name. And so I always thought it was interesting that I should use my full name because it just fits, as opposed to a nickname like Greg, or to change it up at all. So I would just always go with Gregory in these older games. That's also what I was usually just called as a kid. And now for your rival. So I would always name my rival various things, and when you're a kid, you love naming your rival after whatever funny word. But of late, I always play against a good friend of mine whose name is Andrew. So I think that we can pay him homage here and name our character after Andrew. It's always so funny that Professor Oak forgets his grandson's name, or that's how they played it out. I wonder if that was an English localization change that they made, or how things worked. But certainly the memes have penetrated a lot of the Pokemon Twitterverse about all of that. And then here we go. Your Pokemon adventure waits. Let's go. And the Pallet Town theme is classic. And here, oh, you're playing the Super Nintendo. You know, I actually thought that you were playing the original Nintendo in this game. So maybe for the next stream, I'll have to switch to my Super Nintendo controller to play. That one's also just much more ergonomic. I remember a few years ago, I played through a lot of the old Zelda games, and I played on the original Nintendo controllers, especially the Super Nintendo and the NES ones. And I found that maybe I'm just getting old, but the carpal tunnel was crazy that I got afterward. It took me weeks to recover from some of it. So one quick tip that it took me too long to learn is that you can actually withdraw a potion from your PC here. And now this becomes really handy because when you end up withdrawing that potion, you can use it in your initial boss battle fight coming up against the rival after you pick your starter. I've always found that a lot of that fight comes down to some RNG mechanics and whether or not you get lucky with a critical hit or whether they continue to spam defense lowering moves or attack lowering moves. So having the potion in your back pocket just helps you gain that little extra bit of experience, which I have found makes it a little bit easier to win that first battle. And not only win that first battle, but then to fight enemies in the tall grass. One other thing I should note is that this is really my first time streaming anything live. So I hope that you all bear with me if I have any technical difficulties or pauses while going through a lot of this. But I gotta tell you, it is a lot of fun. One thing I love doing in these games is you have to talk to everyone, you have to touch everything, you have to make sure that you can test every little area. That's probably the Zelda player in me. One of the fun things too is that this TV here it mentions there's a movie on TV, 4 boys are walking on railroad tracks. I better go too. And that's actually a call out to the movie Stand By Me, which is a movie from the 1980s about a book. It's based off a book, I believe, called The Body by Stephen King. And it's more of a horror or typical Stephen King book, but the movie is really a coming-of-age story about 4 boys who go on an adventure very similar to Pokemon. Now this is interesting. I never remember that they had tall grass all along this side, this ledge here. You can't get over there, or at least I don't think you can. And then, this honestly should just be the thumbnail for this video, because that's exactly how I feel about being able to stream this, play on a modded controller, post this up online. Yeah, technology really is incredible. I don't believe that there's anyone in here right now who gives us anything of value. You can go into your rival's house and talk to his sister. Later on, they'll be giving us the map, and we'll make sure that Andrew gives that to us. Now, the moment of truth is going to come up soon as to which starter we pick. And this is something I've been debating for quite some time. You know, the funny thing about these original starters is that there really are, to me at least, there's really no bad choice. I know that people say that it's supposed to be easy, medium, and hard mode, with Charmander being the hardest, Bulbasaur being the easiest. I think in Gen 1, especially with a Razor Leaf for Bulbasaur, eventually Venusaur, having such a high critical hit chance, it does make Bulbasaur an easier pick in this generation than maybe in other generations, other Kanto games. But I do find that aside from the first Brock fight, you really do have quite a good mix of a utility for each of these starters, which you don't always get to see in every single game. Now, before we get the starters, let's talk to our friend Andrew. You know, replaying a lot of these games is cool to see the little tips that they give you on how to play them. And then up here is a mysterious encyclopedia. And over there, you have the Pokeballs. So anyway, to get back to why I was having difficulty choosing a starter, it's really because I was trying to think back on which starters have I played with before, which ones have I not played with for a while, how do I typically like to do a playthrough, and I think I've come up with an answer as to who I'm going to pick. The first time I played this game, it took me a surprisingly long time to go up into that tall grass and realize that Oak is supposed to stop you here. So wild Pokemon live in the tall grass. You need your own Pokemon for your protection. It actually doesn't seem like something that you would go through in an initial Pokemon game. I do think that even for children, it requires a little bit more thinking outside the box, in that no one tells you exactly where Oak is, as opposed to a Gen 2 game that more so directs you right to the lab. But I do think that that's something that's charming about some of these older games, is that they don't do a whole lot of hand-holding. Not that I don't like the newer games, but I do find that there's a nostalgic quality to the way that older games all expected you to do some critical thinking, in even just small ways like that. So Andrew is fed up with his grandpa not giving him his starter Pokemon and making him wait. Now Oak is telling us we get a choice of one of these Pokemon. And of course, that means you forego the other two. And only naturally, we get to pick first. So let's see, very first, you have Charmander, the lizard Pokemon. Obviously prefers hot places. When it rains, steam is said to spout from the tip of its tail. Now don't take the order or me saying no as any indication of who we're going to pick. I want to make sure that we go through all of these. So Squirtle is the tiny turtle. After birth, its back swells and hardens into a shell. Powerfully sprays foam from its mouth. So you want the water Pokemon, Squirtle. No, let's see what the other one is. And you have Bulbasaur, the seed Pokemon. A strange seed was planted on its back at birth. The plant sprouts and grows with this Pokemon. So you want the plant Pokemon, Bulbasaur. No. So you have three choices here. As a kid, I can really remember picking one starter over the others more frequently in these older games, especially in playing Pokemon Blue. And there's a reason why we picked Pokemon Blue, is because it is the one that I most remember playing as a child. I believe I played both. My cousins always had both, and including yellow version. But I remember distinctly always picking the starter who my sister thought was her favorite. Now this is usually, I did this as a ploy to get her to play the game with me, to watch along. She would never get further than maybe she would make the first gym. And it lost a lot of interest. She's more of an Animal Crossing type, cozy core type gamer. But the one Pokemon that she always thought was her favorite and always picked was Squirtle. So I figured here, I haven't played through Squirtle in such a long time. It must have been, I think maybe when I was back in high school, I had to play through of Leaf Green with Squirtle. Ever since then, I've replayed Yellow, I've replayed Let's Go, and I've always had the Squirtle on your team with the other starters. I've never done a dedicated Squirtle run since I started playing Pokemon again, which was a few years ago. So you want the water Pokemon Squirtle. There we go. This Pokemon is really energetic. There we go. Now another funny thing about this game is I never used to nickname my Pokemon. But because we're going through and because I have some ideas about how I want to build this playthrough, I figured why not? You gotta nickname some of your Pokemon. Especially because at this point you have all these Pokemon banks, you have home, you have the Poke Transporter, but you have all these games, and if you don't nickname your guys, you don't remember who they were for each game. And that's one nice thing about all the nicknames, is that no matter the generation, that always transfers up. So what should we nickname Squirtle? So I was thinking about different nicknames. One funny one would be Big Man, after the Big Man Blastoise memes that we have. We also have Snapper would be a good one. That's a pretty classic turtle one. But I do think that my sister used to always nickname hers Squirt. And that might just be a shortened way of saying Squirtle. But I always thought it was kind of cute. I think it's also funny when it becomes a Blastoise, and then all of a sudden you have a Blastoise still named Squirt. Sort of like kids who still go by very childish nicknames when they go up and go to work, which I always thought was funny. I as someone whose name is Greg and Gregory, I think both are usually age appropriate for any age, or well known for any age. And I'm kind of glad that my parents gave me a name like that. Not that there's anything wrong with names that can have more childlike nicknames, but I just found that, so what, one day you just have to wake up and your whole identity has changed? So, who knows? And Andrew, of course, takes the one that's strong to us, a Bulbasaur. The one thing that's funny is my friend Andrew would never pick Bulbasaur in this case. He would probably pick Charmander. He'd probably pick Squirtle too. He would never, ever, ever pick Bulbasaur. Usually Bulbasaur is who I pick. I love grass types. Throughout the series, I think grass is probably my favorite starter type to pick. That's gotten harder over the years as I've grown to learn that grass is no longer as strong as other types. But I just always think that grass is cool. So it'll be good that we'll be able to play along for this grass type. So now, let's see what Professor Oak has to say to us. Alright, we can fight against any wild Pokemon that comes our way. Probably won't win. Let's try and win here. So the very first battle comes up, and like I was saying earlier, when you get the potion, it really makes it a little bit easier to make sure that you win this battle. And again, that experience is pretty strong at this game. You essentially level up. The Bulbasaur sprite here, I think, is so interesting. It really does look like Bulbasaur, but I love that it's leaping up out of the air, especially with how big Venusaur gets later on. The Squirtle back sprite, too, I think is charming. It looks just like a turtle, but it also is just, I think, a little bit more, has a little bit more character to it. So here, I am just going to routinely spam Tackle. I know we probably should hit a Tail Whip, and maybe now that he did a Growl, we can get back to even here. Typically, I like to just attack. Oh wow, 2 Growls in a row missed. That's very lucky. Usually, I just like to go on all-out attack, because I find that really you have some diminishing returns. Oh, wow, we've essentially missed, everyone's missed 50% of their attacks. But I do find that we have a bit of an advantage when we just go out and attack first, unless something like that happens. Another funny part about this game is that you don't have the colored bars for the HP here. So, wow, our encounter rates are or our hit rates are incredible right now. Are you serious? Okay, well, I'm going to chance it and do one more tackle. Hope that we don't get a critical hit here. Or hope that he growls. I mean, that's probably gonna add another... Yeah, we're gonna have to attack him once more, but let's hope not critical hit. Okay. And you know what, just to be safe now, I'm gonna use the potion. And now we should be able to win. I don't think even when he keeps lowering our attack like this, he's gonna be able to do enough damage in order to make sure he wins this battle. We still have about 2 more hits we have to land. Okay, and let's hope for one more here. We're probably only doing about 1 hit point anyway. There we go. Yeah, we would have lost that one. This one is difficult because we have 2 antagonistic attacking or defense lowering and attack lowering moves. So, you know, we can lower his defense, he can lower our attack. Whereas if you go up against 2 people who can growl or 2 Pokemon who can lower each other's defense, then you can get by with a little bit more of a all-out strategy. But hey, we use the potion. It's pretty cheap, and we gain 67 experience points. Also no experience bar here. And another note is that you still, always surprised me for replaying Gen 1, you still have just 1 special stat. So that's going to make a Pokemon like an Abra, a Kadabra Alakazam very powerful here. Alright, Gregory defeated Andrew. Usually when we play against each other in Pokemon, that's also how our battles go. I am a big fan about using some cheese strategies, such as a fear strategy against my buddy, because I may spend a little bit more time studying up some of this stuff than he does. So for any of you who don't know what the fear strategy is the fear strategy is an ability where you can essentially take down any Pokemon, aside from a ghost type, or ones with some certain evasive maneuvers. You can essentially take down any strong Pokemon. The way that you do it is through the acronym FEAR. It stands for Focus Sash. Alright, let's see, Rattata or Pidgey? Alright, a Pidgey. Pidgey's sprite is really interesting, it just looks like a bird. Yeah, they really, some of these ones are very traditional RPG, like, I'm surprised that their names aren't just bird, or something more common. But anyway, so the acronym FEAR stands for Focus Sash, Endeavor, Focus Sash, Endeavor, Quick Attack, and then Repeat. Now again, this isn't exactly an exact acronym. I didn't come up with it. Here, we'll get a replenish for our potion. So the idea is that you make your Pokemon hold a Focus Sash. So that way, when they get absolutely destroyed on their first hit, because usually you're doing this with a joke Pokemon. You're doing it with a level 1 Rattata in competitive, or against someone's Arceus or something. So here you throw it out and the person thinks that you're crazy. And so once you do that, with the Focus Sash, you survive the hit, and you go down to 1 hit point. After you get down to the 1 hit point, you then use the move Endeavor to bring them down to 1 hit point. And after you've done that, your next turn is you use a priority move, like Quick Attack, to make sure that you then go first and you do enough damage to knock out that 1 hit point. And there you go, you just knocked out someone's Arceus with a level 1 Rattata. It is a little bit of a cheese stat, or cheese strategy. You know, it's fun. It's always fun if you're playing against someone who doesn't know about it, because you just watch them cower in fear. And the R stands for repeat. So, and next time, use something like that in a later game against one of your friends. The Rattata sprite here is pretty good. I think it's funny how he looks like he's on hind legs trying to make himself bigger, almost like a cat would do. Okay, so our defense fell. Let's see, I'm surprised he's faster than us. But I guess that makes a little bit of sense. Okay. I mean, you would hope at level 6 we would be a little bit faster than a level 4 Rattata, but that's not too crazy. Alright, and the nice thing about just doing a vanilla playthrough like this is that you're not really worried about how much you're leveling, whether you're over leveling, if you're playing a hardcore Nuzlocke. You can just really sit back and you can enjoy the formula of the game. You can enjoy what made Pokemon great. I forgot how big. I really did forget about how big these Pokemon centers are in these games. Free healthcare. We will not be getting political on this stream about healthcare not costing anything for Pokemon. That would be something, though, if they ended up making Pokemon healing cost something. You know what? We did know that there were 2 types of bug Pokemon, caterpillar Pokemon. Alright, so now you have to go and get Oak's parcel at the mart. This is one of those other, stupid little kid things that I never realized. Not that any little kid is stupid. I was stupid as a kid, or maybe not forethinking. But games like this helped with that. So what was difficult for me was you would always come up here and they would block your path. So you can't go through because this is private property. And when you talk to her, she says, "Oh, Grandpa, don't be so mean. He hasn't had his coffee yet." This is a well-known fact at this point, but in the Japanese version, the illusion is not that he had drank coffee, or lack thereof, that he was suffering from not drinking something. More so the opposite. But anyway, back to figuring out how you had to get Oak's parcel and go back. To me, it was probably just a feature of not having enough time to play the game individually. So, when I would play the game as a kid, I wasn't allowed to play for as long as we're playing now, even 28 minutes. Maybe if we were in the car somewhere, but it really was a very quick one and done, 15-minute spurts I would play these games for. So until I got older and I could really sit down and play for a long time and have the attention span to play for that long, was when I really started to develop a bit more of an appreciation for the game and a bit more forethought into how to get past some of these obstacles. Alright, and now... wow, this guy's playing some good defense. Alright, let's go down, return the parcel to Oak. Let's take the long way around. Let's go through the tall grass again. And use every bit of experience in this game. Right, Rattata. Now I mentioned this when I was picking Squirtle as the starter here, but I wanted to pick Squirtle in part because I haven't used Squirtle in a playthrough in a long time as our dedicated starter. So as part of that, I'm gonna be picking a lot of Pokemon that I've never used in a playthrough. At least I haven't taken to the Elite Four before and beaten the game. Blastoise is an exception. I think, in some playthroughs, like I was talking about before, I've used Blastoise with other starters, but I've never really used Blastoise in a long time as our main starter Pokemon. And so I want to do the same thing with the rest of the team. I'm hoping that maybe we could get some more interesting playthroughs and more interesting combinations here. That really is where a lot of the fun can come in, especially when you don't have a newer generation that you're playing through. It's being able to use Pokemon you've never used before. I think that's a lot of the magic of the game, honestly, is that you can have such a different playthrough from someone else, and you can also have such a different playthrough every time you go through it. Yeah, the game itself is difficult in terms of leveling, but once you do level, you really can beat the game with just about any Pokemon. You know, I don't think you can make it through and beat the game with just a single Ditto, maybe. That might be difficult. You could, maybe you could do it, who knows. That would maybe be a fun challenge. But I think aside from that, you really, if you level your Pokemon high enough, you're going to be able to muscle through any fight in the game. So that really allows you to have a bit more of a diversity than I think a Fire Emblem or some other RPGs where you get a bit more control over your character. The custom Pokeball Oak ordered. I've always wondered what was the custom ball he ordered. I'm sure that there's someone who says it. You know, I don't think it's maybe the Master Ball or the GS Ball. But who knows, maybe it's a Pokeball from Kurt over in Johto. And here we get the Pokédex. The Pokédex, when I was a kid, initially playing through these games, I felt like I never checked the Pokédex. Even on a new playthrough now, I find that I rarely check some of the Pokédex. I want to make it a real effort to do that here, to make sure that I'm checking it a little bit more, that I'm just being a little bit more cognizant and aware of what's going on there. Because it really is a huge part of this game. And the whole point of the game is you have the story of going in forth and beating the Elite Four, becoming champion. But once you do that, the real post-game, so to say, or the real completion of the game is getting every single Pokemon, all 150 of them. And now in this game, that was a little bit more difficult than in the coming games, primarily because of the whole starter issue. So you can't breed Pokemon in this game. You can't actually do it in Fire Red and Leaf Green. You can't do it in the Let's Go games either. That has definitely put a hamper sometimes on my completionist formula. But because that was the case, you couldn't just find a friend who had a Charmander or a Charizard at that point and breed an egg for you and send it to you. You had to essentially have a friend who would be willing to restart their game, or would be willing to trade you their Charizard, and maybe you had someone who had a Charmeleon. You know, so that really, to me, was the reason why a lot of kids ended up having both Pokemon games. They also were at the time, I might be misremembering, but a lot of Game Boy games at that time were about $30 or so, which was a lot, but it wasn't as much as what a Pokemon, or what a N64 game cost at that time, or Super Nintendo. So let's go and let's look at Squirt here. Squirt is So Squirt has pretty good special, even attack. Speed is a little bit a hair under that, and defense is good. Let's see, is there a way that we can... I'm trying to see if... I don't know if there's a way that we can tell how powerful all the attacks are. I believe Bubble in this game in Gen 1 is only 20 power. Which is what it stays for the rest of the series. let's use our first bubble, huh? This is really what I remember hitting with Squirtle, is casting bubble, water gun. That really was where I remember using a ton of Squirtle. Yeah, 20. Only 20 attack on bubble. But we get what's called a same type attack bonus, so, or stab. For those of you who are newer or don't know, or trust me, if anyone has made it through this long in the video, then they will not mind rehearing this. But a same type attack bonus means that you get a 1.5 times multiplier on any move that's the same type as your Pokemon. So because Squirtle is a water type and Bubble is a water type move, there is a same type attack bonus for using Bubble. So Bubble is because it is a 20 attack, but it has stab here, then that actually means it's going to be 30, because 1.5 times 20 is 30. People, though, like to talk about what they call the super effective swindle, or sometimes the stab swindle, depending on what you're talking about. And essentially what people refer to as the swindle here is that you might fall into thinking that just because you have a stab move or a super effective move against an opponent, that is the best way to attack. And that's not always the case. So for example, Bubble with our stab bonus is 30 HP. Or not HP, 30 attack. However, Tackle on its own is 35. So technically Tackle, and because our attack and our special are the exact same, then we should be doing a little bit more damage with Tackle. I'm going to put a pin in that because we just came across Nidoran Female. So I came out here to Route 22, primarily because I wanted to see some of the Pokemon that are on this route, such as Nidoran Female. I don't believe you can catch Mankey here. Mankey is a personal favorite of mine, just because as a kid I always liked Mankey, and I just thought that Mankey was fun. I thought he was quirky in the anime, especially Ash's Primeape. So, but I want to see who else we can get out here. It also wouldn't hurt to train up a little bit while we get ready for one of our first big fights. So we actually have a 35% chance of getting a Nidoran Female and a 5% chance of Nidoran Male. Not to sound like a broken record here. Do we actually... You know what? We don't actually even have any Pokeballs. So, before we start looking at who to capture on this route, let's think first about getting a few Pokeballs. Anyway, to get back to our same type attack bonus and our super effective discussion. So you might be saying to yourself, though, okay, well, if Tackle does more damage or has a higher damage output from Squirtle, how come some of those Pidgeys and Rattatas were taking, they were able to take 2, 3, 4 tackles, and when we started doing things with Bubble, well, all of a sudden Bubble started doing a ton of damage. And a lot of times that also comes into the defense of the other party. So, for example, Pidgeys and Rattatas, their special might not be as high as maybe their defense is. And so when you do the calculation, it turns out that actually a 30 attack power move does more damage to that specific opponent than you would with a 35. Let's see here. Let's buy 10 Pokeballs. I know that's a lot. I'm not really concerned right now about some of our money, because I think that we're going to be able to get a little bit more coming up. I also am usually pretty conservative with money in these games. Spearow. Spearow looks so sleepy in this sprite here. Let's see if Spearow will take one more tackle. Alright, wow. Squirt is getting pretty powerful already. Especially at this point with Bubble, there's nothing that Brock is going to be able to do. Here we go, Nidoran female. And I think we are going to welcome one of our first members of our team. Alright, Nidoran female, welcome to the team. I decided to go with Nidoran female for a few reasons. I've played through Nidoran male playthroughs before. For those of you who don't know, Nidoran male is well known as the best way to do a speed run through the first Pokemon games. And because we're playing through Pokemon Blue, and I haven't played through Pokemon Blue in forever, Nidoran female is actually more common in Pokemon Blue, I figured, you know what, we might as well run through the game with the more common one who I personally haven't run through the game with before. They're essentially the same. The reason why people run through the game with Nidoran male, though, is because the male Nidoran just has a little bit more attack, while as Nidoran female favors a little bit more in defense. And when you're doing a speed run, you end up, that ends up being important. Here for our playthrough, though, it's really diminishing returns. So, welcome to the team Nidoran female. Although small, its venomous barbs render this Pokemon dangerous. The female has smaller horns. And we do want to give Nidoran female a nickname. I'm trying to think of a good nickname for a Nidoran female. So, let's think. Nidoran female, our first capture in the game. She's a blue female. You actually can't even... No, she is available in Pokemon Yellow, so maybe you can play through with her there. Let's name her after exactly what she looks like, and name her Mama. Alright. Let's look at Mama, the poison type. Now, as many of you know, there's a very cool strategy to be able to switch train your Pokemon and keeping one out front. And then switching them in. Let's do one quick battle with Mama before we get ready to close out. I'd love to do Mama versus one of her own type. Let's just admire this back sprite for 1 second, though. That really is... You can't tell at all what it looks like. It looks like Mickey Mouse. I guess in this case, Minnie Mouse. Let's switch in Squirt. Let's get Mama a little bit of experience for her first battle. That's what's so funny about these back sprites in this initial game, is that Squirtles looks great. You can tell exactly who he is. He looks just like a turtle. I think anyone on the street would know that Squirtle is a turtle here. Nidoran female, I don't know how you're going to tell exactly what that is. All right, 8 experience. And with that, I think we should call it a game. Call it a day for right now. On the next episode, we will continue to train up our new team member, Mama. We will go and fight our rival right before you go to Victory Road. And we will proceed upward toward the Viridian Forest. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.